Today we uncover a hidden family curse disguised as loyalty. You'll see Evelyn Marek confront her children with a single, damning journal. This heirloom carries generations of shame and terror. The truth behind it chills the blood. You will remember this. The rain pattered against the townhouse windows like insistent fingers, blurring the coastal gray beyond. In the living room, shadows clung to the heirloom furniture, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and unspoken years. Evelyn Marek stood at the threshold, her hands trembling as she clutched the leather-bound journal, its covers slick from the downpour she'd braved to fetch it from the attic. Decades of silence weighed on her chest, a weary matriarch's burden. But tonight, it cracked. Mara. Daniel. Her voice, hoarse from disuse, cut through the quiet. They turned from their separate corners. Mara, sharp-eyed and distant on the sagging armchair, nursing a mug of tea gone cold. Daniel, her son, leaning against the mantel with that practiced calm, his gaze flickering like he knew a storm was coming. "Come to the table, please." They exchanged a glance, suspicion etching lines on their faces, the polite distance of estranged kin. Mara rose first, her steps measured, setting the mug down with a clink that echoed too loudly. Daniel followed, slower, his mediator's poise masking the old wounds she could almost see tightening his jaw. Evelyn waited until they sat, the oak table between them scarred by generations of meals and myths. Her heart hammered, anxiety coiling like the rain gutters outside, threatening to flood her resolve. What if this shattered them? What if her words unleashed the anger she'd hoarded like a secret shame? The family locket at her throat felt heavy, a fractured chain linking them to lies passed down as loyalty. Silence had been her shield, protecting the fragile web of what remained. But it had embalmed the pain, let it fester in the dark. She placed the journal on the table, its pages warped and edges softened by the rain, water beating like unshed tears on the cover. It landed with a soft thud, drawing their eyes. Mara leaned forward, curiosity warring with wariness. Daniel's fingers drummed once, then stilled. "I've carried this too long," Evelyn said, her voice quivering at the edges, anxiety threading through like the chills seeping under the door. "Our family stories, the myths we've told ourselves to keep the peace. They're not truths, not anymore." She hesitated, fingers hovering over the clasp, the choice burning. Open it and risk their fury, or retreat into the guilty quiet that had corroded them all. The rain intensified, a rhythmic demand, but the need clawed deeper than fear. Truth wasn't a weapon. It was the only path through the rot. Evelyn's breath steadied, resolve hardening her spine. She unlatched the journal, the creak of leather slicing the tension. "I'm going to read from this. Name the betrayals we've buried. For all of us." Mara's eyes widened, a flicker of raw hunger breaking her skepticism. Daniel shifted, his calm fracturing into something attentive, almost eager. The suspicion eased, taut as a bowstring releasing into focus. Yet the air hung heavy with the unspoken. Could they bear the naked truth, stripped of myth? Evelyn met their gazes, the question lingering like the rain's endless tap, unanswered, as she turned the first damp page. As the first revelations began to unfold, the tension in the room deepened, drawing them further into the heart of the family's hidden past. The rain tapped insistently against the townhouse windows, a relentless Morse code that amplified the hush in the living room. Evelyn Marek sat at the scarred oak table, her arthritic fingers tracing the damp leather of the journal, its pages swollen from the coastal mist seeping through the cracks. Across from her, Mara Levin shifted in her chair, eyes narrowed like a lawyer sizing up a reluctant witness. Daniel Marquez, her son, leaned back against the creaking armchair, his calm facade cracking at the edges, fists clenched in his lap, betraying the storm beneath. Evelyn's breath caught, a shallow rasp in the dim light. Anxiety coiled in her chest, tight as the locket she'd worn for decades, its chain now dangling from her trembling hand like a noose. She lifted it, the silver tarnished, the clasp worn smooth from generations of hiding. "This," she said, voice fracturing like thin ice. "This was the first lie. Not just an heirloom, but the key to what we buried." Mara's gaze flicked to the locket, defensive walls rising. "Grandma, we've all touched it. Passed it down like some sacred relic. What are you saying?" Her words hung sharp, protective, as if truth might shatter the fragile thread binding them. Daniel leaned forward, the wood groaning under him. "Mom, maybe this isn't—" But he stopped, eyes locking on the pendant, where a faint inscription gleamed. Family above all. His own silence had been his armor, but now it felt like quicksand. Evelyn's pulse thrummed in her ears, the room's chill seeping into her bones. Fear clawed. Would this unravel them completely? Yet as she spoke, words tumbling like rain off eaves, resolve hardened in her veins. "Your great-grandmother didn't lose it in that fire, as the story goes. She pawned it to cover my father's gambling debts. And I knew. I lied to protect her, to keep the family whole. But silence?" She met their eyes, the locket swinging like a pendulum between them. It wasn't protection. It was the betrayal that divided us first. Shared shock rippled through the air, gazes converging on the locket, once a symbol of unbreakable loyalty, now fractured in the lamplight. Mara's skepticism softened, Daniel's mediator mask slipped, pulling them into a tentative orbit of attention. The rain drummed on, but in that suspended breath, the question lingered, unspoken. Were they ready to hear how the closest ties had woven the deepest deceptions? With the locket's truth laid bare, Evelyn felt the pull toward deeper shadows, leading them upward to confront the attic's guarded relics. The stairs to the attic creaked like old bones under Evelyn's deliberate steps, each one echoing the tremor in her chest. Rain pattered against the slanted roof above, a muffled drumbeat that seemed to urge her onward or hold her back. Mara followed close, her footsteps hesitant, eyes darting to the shadowed corners where dust motes hung in the dim hall light below. Daniel brought up the rear, his hand brushing the worn banister, face a mask of quiet appraisal, as if measuring the weight of this uncharted climb. Evelyn paused at the top, hand on the latch, heart pounding with the old fear. What if the words, once loosed, scattered like these forgotten relics? She pushed the door open, and the attic unfolded. A cramped vault of angled ceilings and stacked boxes, heirlooms cloaked in yellowed newsprint, the air thick with the scent of cedar and stale time. Her fingers found the chain, dangling from the single bulb overhead. She pulled it, and the attic lamp flickered to life, casting a frail, amber glow that sliced through the gloom like a hesitant confession. Shadows retreated unevenly, revealing the clutter. A trunk scarred by decades, bundles of letters tied with frayed ribbon, the family locket glinting from atop a pile like a false promise. Evelyn's breath caught, anxiety coiling tight, visions of fractured faces flashing unbidden. But she straightened, resolve hardening in her spine. "This is where it starts," she said, voice low but steady, pulling a box forward with a scrape that cut the silence. Dust billowed, illuminated in the lamp's beam, particles dancing like unspoken truths finely stirred. Mara stepped nearer, arms crossed against the chill, her skepticism softening into something raw, eyes tracing the lamp's halo on Evelyn's lined face. Daniel knelt by the box, fingers hovering over a faded photograph, the shared air between them thickening. No longer distant politeness, but a tentative bridge of witness. Evelyn opened the lid, the creak amplifying the rain's whisper. "We built our stories in the dark down there," she began, gesturing vaguely to the floors below. "Polite myths to keep the hurt at bay. But up here, under this light..." She trailed off, the lamp's warm insistence pulling her gaze to the locket, its chain tangled like veins of deceit. The contrast sharpened. Past selves smiling in sepia, present selves exposed, raw. Her hands trembled less now, intention blooming through the dread. She would name it. Let the light drag it from hiding. How could this fragile glow unearth what shadows had guarded so fiercely? The question hung, unanswered, as Evelyn lifted the first letter, her voice ready to break the spell. Under the attic's revealing light, Evelyn turned to the heart of Joseph's betrayal, naming the promises that had poisoned their legacy. The attic air hung heavy, rain drumming a relentless tattoo on the roof above, as if the sky itself demanded confession. Evelyn's fingers, knotted with age, clutched the family locket, its silver chain dulled by years of hiding, the locket itself a tarnished vessel for myths they'd all swallowed. She dangled it before Mara and Daniel, the weak beam of the desk lamp catching its facets like fractured light on water. Her voice, steady now despite the tremor in her chest, cut through the creak of settling beams. "Joseph," she began. The name a stone dropped into still water. "He promised us the world, didn't he? Back in '72, when the mills shut down and your grandfather's hands bled from odd jobs, Joseph swore he'd fix it. 'Ma, I'll keep us whole,' he said, eyes like his father's, full of that old fire. But the promises piled up like unpaid bills. He took the factory job in the city, sent money at first, then excuses. And the women, oh, the letters I burned, thinking I was sparing you the scorch." Her breath hitched, anxiety coiling tight in her throat, a familiar vice she'd nursed for decades. The locket swung gently, a pendulum marking the silence that followed. Daniel shifted on the dusty trunk, his calm facade cracking. But Mara leaned forward, her face sharp in the lamplight, skepticism etched in the lines around her eyes. "Grandma, stop. Just stop with the pretty words. What about us? What about growing up without a dad because you all decided lies were easier?" Her voice cracked, raw, pulling the room's tension taut like a wire. The question hung there, unanswered, slicing through Evelyn's words. Could silence ever be justified if it had gutted childhoods, severed bonds like this one? Evelyn's hand froze, the locket warm against her palm, its weight a sudden anchor. For the first time, the admission clawed free. No softening it. No retreat. That silence, Mara. It wasn't protection. It was another betrayal. Mine to Joseph, and his to all of us. I watched him slip away, the family splintering because I wouldn't name the rot. It tore him from us, left you fatherless in the echo. Anxiety sharpened into resolve, her gaze locking on Mara's, unblinking. The locket slipped into her lap, no longer a shield but evidence. Its clasp broken long ago. Daniel exhaled, the sound almost lost in the rain's murmur, his own wounds stirring beneath the mediator's mask. Mara didn't pull away. Instead, her shoulders eased a fraction, the shared air thickening with something fragile. Understanding, perhaps, that this truth, brutal as it was, could be borne together. The attic light held them, unflinching, as Evelyn's voice rose again, determined, the silence fracturing at last. As Joseph's shadow lingered in their words, Evelyn's memories pulled them back to the living room hearth, where past silences had first dimmed their warmth. The rain pattered against the townhouse windows like hesitant fingers, blurring the coastal haze outside. In the living room, firelight flickered from the hearth, casting long shadows over the gathered trio. Evelyn Marek, her hands trembling slightly on the dampened journal. Mara, her granddaughter, perched on the edge of the armchair, eyes sharp with unspoken hunger. Daniel, her son, leaning forward in quiet vigilance, the lines of his face etched deeper by the dim glow. Evelyn's voice, weary and threaded with decades of unsaid words, broke the hush. She opened the journal, its pages swollen from winter's kiss, and read aloud. November 12th, 1967. Another evening by the fire, the flames dancing as if they could burn away the weight. But the truth, it sank into the silence, like embers drowning in ash. I watched Joseph laugh with the boys, promising the world, while I said nothing. Routine wrapped us tight, dinner plates clinking, stories half told, protecting what? The warmth we pretended still held. Her words hung, heavy as the creak of the old floorboards. The camera lingered on her face, close up, the exhaustion in her eyes like faded ink. Tiredness born of years guarding the hearth's false glow. Cut to memory. A younger Evelyn, skirts brushing the rug, stoking the fire as rain drummed outside. Joseph, broad-shouldered and charming, tousles young Daniel's hair, vowing, "I'll be back before the snow melts, Ma. Take care of them." But her lips seal shut, the poker in her hand stirring coals that pop and sigh, swallowing the plea she never voices. The routine. Plates cleared, bedtime tales that skirt the edges of reality. Truth bubbling up only to dissolve in the evening's quiet tide. Mara shifted, her breath catching, while Daniel's gaze softened. Not with pity, but a dawning trust, as if the journal's pages were finally mapping the hidden contours of their shared map. Evelyn paused, the leather cover cool against her palms, its vulnerability mirroring her own. The symbol of it all, this rain-dampened relic, once a private confessional, now a bridge across the chasm. She felt the words stir something ironclad within, the tiredness ebbing into resolve, a quiet fire rekindling not in the hearth, but in her chest. "I let it drown," she continued, voice steadying, eyes lifting to meet theirs. The silence didn't save the warmth. It melted it away, night after night. The rain intensified, a muffled roar, as the memory faded back to the present. The journal closing with a soft snap, leaving the air thick with what couldn't be reclaimed. Could she admit it fully? That the hearth's glow had been forever quenched by her maternal hush? The question lingered, unanswered, in the fire's dying light. The fire's embers fading, they returned to the attic, where Mara's pressing questions demanded Evelyn confront her deepest fears head-on. The attic air hung thick, laced with the faint must of old paper and rain seeping through the eaves. Evelyn sat on a worn trunk, the family locket dangling from her fingers like a pendulum of unresolved vows. Mara paced the narrow space, her boots scuffing the floorboards, while Daniel leaned against a beam, his face shadowed but attentive. The single bulb overhead flickered to life as Mara flicked the switch, casting a harsh, unyielding glow that sliced through the dust motes and pinned Evelyn's features in stark relief. "Grandma, enough," Mara said, her voice cracking like the thunder outside. She stopped, fists clenched at her sides, eyes boring into Evelyn's. "You've danced around Joseph's name all evening, whispering about promises broken like it's some fairy tale. But it's not. He left me without a father, without answers. Who decides I don't get to know? Who has the right to bury that for the sake of, what? Keeping this fragile peace?" Evelyn's breath caught, her hands trembling as she clutched the locket tighter. The light bathed her face, hollowing her cheeks, illuminating the lines etched by years of swallowed words. She had rehearsed this silence like a prayer, believing it the only thread holding them together. But Mara's demand clawed at it, raw and insistent, pulling Evelyn from the edge of retreat. I thought it would destroy us, Evelyn whispered at first, her voice a fragile thread. Then, as the attic light steadied, unflinching, she straightened. The glow warmed her skin, not with comfort, but with the demand of exposure, forcing the shadows from her eyes. Your question, it's the one I've evaded longest. The right to know? I claimed it for myself, hoarding the truth like a miser because speaking it meant watching everything shatter. Joseph's betrayal wasn't just his. My quiet let it fester, let it steal you from him, from us. I feared the words would unravel the family, leave us in pieces no lariat could bind. But holding back, it was never protection. It was fear, pure and choking. Mara's shoulders slumped, the accusation in her eyes softening into something shared, a mirror of that terror. Daniel stepped forward, his hand brushing Evelyn's arm, the light weaving their silhouettes into one fragile tableau. Trust flickered there, born not of ease, but of this mutual dread exposed. Yet as the rain drummed on, the question lingered in the illuminated air. Could she voice the rest, when the specter of loss still loomed larger than any confession? In the wake of that shared fear, Daniel's own transformation stirred, shifting the family's dynamic under the attic's persistent light. The attic light hummed like a hesitant heartbeat, casting long shadows across the creaking floorboards. Rain pattered against the slanted window, a relentless whisper that mirrored the storm inside Daniel Marquez. He sat cross-legged on the worn rug, the family lariat coiled loosely in his lap. A braided cord of faded leather and silk threads, once a symbol of unbreakable promises, now heavy with the weight of unspoken years. His fingers traced its knots absent-mindedly, but his eyes, usually steady and mediating, flickered with something raw. Evelyn watched him from her perch on the edge of an old trunk, her journal damp and open in her hands, its pages a map of confessions half unfurled. Mara leaned against the wall, arms crossed, her gaze sharp as the winter chill seeping through the cracks. The air was thick, intimate, laced with the scent of aged wood and salt from the sea below. I've always been the one to smooth things over, Daniel said finally, his voice low, almost lost in the rain's murmur. It wasn't a question, but a crack in the dam he'd built around his own emptiness. He paused, the lariat tightening in his grip as if it choked him, kept the peace by saying nothing, like Dad, Joseph, when he walked out. I told myself silence held us together, that words would just pull the threads apart. His chest rose and fell, the passive calm of the mediator fracturing. How much void had he fed with that quiet? The family teetered on the edge now, Evelyn's revelations about Joseph's broken vows hanging like smoke. Promises of return that left Mara fatherless, left Daniel nursing wounds he pretended weren't there. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes soft but insistent. And has it, Daniel? Held us? He met her gaze, then Mara's, the distance between them shrinking in the attic's unforgiving glow. The lariat slipped from his fingers, uncoiling like a breath released. No, it's been strangling us. This thing, it was meant to bind us in loyalty, but every time I chose quiet, it tightened around my neck, around all of us. His words gained edge, resolve blooming from the ache. A active fire where mediation had smoldered passively. The emptiness I've carried, it's not just mine. It's what silence does. But truth, maybe that's the medicine. not the shatter I feared. Mara uncrossed her arms, stepping closer, her skepticism softening into something shared. Then let's not stop now. Daniel nodded, picking up the journal's pen from the floor. We write the next chapter. Together. No more hiding behind the calm. His hand steadied, the lariat forgotten at his feet, its loops a reminder of what could no longer bind them in harm. But as the rain drummed on, the question lingered in the dim light. Could they truly unravel the chokehold and let healing breathe? With Daniel's resolve igniting a collective shift, Dr. Helena's guidance arrived to formalize their path, deepening the ritual under the attic light. The attic light flickered like a hesitant heartbeat, casting long shadows across the cluttered beams where dust motes danced in the rain-muffled glow. Evelyn sat rigid on the edge of an old trunk, her hands clasped around the damp journal, its pages whispering secrets she wasn't sure she could bear to voice. Dr. Helena Park knelt before her, eyes steady as the therapist's voice cut through the creak of settling wood. Evelyn, this is the voice of truth. A ritual, not just words. When the fear rises, when silence tugs at you like that old lariat around your neck, you promise aloud to hear every unsaid word, to speak the hidden pains, and to record what follows. No retreating? It's the only way to unbury without breaking everything. Evelyn's mind churned, a storm behind her eyes. The family downstairs, Mara with her sharp, seeking gaze, Daniel's calm facade cracking, waited like ghosts in the downpour. What if naming Joseph's betrayal, the fractured promises that left Mara fatherless, shattered the fragile threads holding them? Silence had been her shield for decades, a lie that protected the remnants of their bond. No more shadows. The attic light steadied, as if approving, bathing her in a clarity that eased the coil in her chest. Tension ebbed into acceptance, a quiet resolve settling in her bones. Downstairs, Mara shifted, a tentative nod from Daniel, trust blooming in the spaces between. But in Evelyn's mind, the question lingered. Could she truly speak it all, without the fear pulling her back into the quiet? Guided by the vow, they descended once more to the living room, where the act of recording solidified their shared commitment. Rain pattered against the townhouse windows like hesitant fingers, while the old wooden floor creaked underfoot, echoing the weight of unspoken years. Mara and Daniel settled at the scarred oak table in the living room, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and aged paper. Evelyn hovered nearby, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the rain-dampened journal at the center. A sodden relic, its pages warped from coastal storms and hidden tears, now the anchor for their fragile pact. Mara's fingers drummed the table's edge, her eyes flicking to the journal. This, recording it all. What if it's not enough? The silence has claws. It'll creep back, twist the words before they're even dry. Doubt laced her voice, sharp as the winter chill seeping through the cracks. Daniel nodded, his mediator's calm fracturing for a moment, brow furrowed. He glanced at Evelyn, whose face, etched with decades of restraint, held a quiet plea. The choice loomed between them. Etch the truths into permanence, or let the old hush reclaim the room, pulling them back into the shadows of Joseph's absence, the fractured locket, the attic's buried light. Evelyn drew a breath, the sound ragged against the rain's murmur. No longer cloaked in fear, she slid into the chair beside them, her voice steadying like a flame finding air. We've let it choke us too long. Speak it now, with me. Let the words bind us, or they'll unravel everything. Her hand brushed the journal's cover, watermarks blooming like veins of vulnerability, urging them forward. Daniel reached for the old tape recorder, its hum joining the creaks as he pressed record. Mara hesitated, then leaned in, her skepticism yielding to a spark of resolve. For the child I never knew as father. For us. Their voices intertwined, halting at first, then resolute, narrating the betrayals, the omissions, the rain-soaked nights that had drowned their bonds. Evelyn listened, her own confessions weaving in, the family's breaths sinking like a shared pulse. In that intimate glow, they became co-witnesses. Truth no longer a solitary burden, but a practiced right, defiant against the encroaching quiet. As the tape whirred on, the rain softened, but the question lingered in the air. Could this etched testament truly forge a new covenant? Or would silence, patient as the sea, erode it all? Dawn broke with the promise of renewal, drawing them back to the table under the watchful eye of the attic light, to affirm their ritual in the morning's gentle hold. The morning light filtered through the rain-streaked windows of the coastal townhouse, casting a soft, diffused glow over the scarred oak table. Evelyn sat at its head, her hands resting on the dampened journal, its pages still whispering of the night's confessions. The attic light, that single bulb she'd flicked on hours ago to banish the shadows, now hummed faintly from the stairs above, a steady sentinel, its beams spilling down like an unspoken challenge. Outside, the rain had softened to a rhythmic patter, no longer a torrent, but a murmur, as if the world itself were testing the fragile peace. Evelyn's chest tightened, the old anxiety coiling like smoke in her lungs. The silence of dawn felt too vast, too inviting. It whispered that last night's vows were just words, that the calm was a trick, ready to swallow them back into the familiar dark. She glanced at Mara, her granddaughter, whose eyes held a quiet vigilance, and Daniel, her son, whose steady gaze masked the wounds he'd only begun to name. Had they truly promised truth over silence? Or would the pull of old habits drag them under again? She drew a breath, the air thick with the scent of wet wood and lingering coffee. "We can't let it fade," Evelyn said, her voice cracking at first, laced with the tremor of doubt. It was the actor in her rising, not the weary matriarch, but the one who'd chosen to speak. The journal. It's not just a record. It's our oath. Every morning, like this one, we face it anew. Mara leaned forward, her fingers brushing the family locket at her throat, its fractured chain a reminder of broken loyalties. "Grandma, after what you told us about Joseph, his promises, the way he vanished, I won't let silence steal more. We're in this." Her words carried the edge of her own unresolved ache. But there was warmth now, a bridge forming. Daniel nodded, pulling a pen from his pocket, his calm facade giving way to a rare, open resolve. No more mediating from the sidelines. We write it down, we say it out loud. Truth isn't a one-night storm. It's the rain that keeps coming, washing clean. As they opened the journal, Evelyn felt the anxiety ebb, a slow unraveling in her core. Her voice steadied, flowing like the morning drizzle, soft, persistent, alive. She read a line from the night before, her tone no longer apologetic, but affirming. And the attic lights seemed to brighten, casting their faces in a warm, unyielding clarity. Relief bloomed in her chest, tentative but real, as their shared nods wove a new thread among them. Mara and Daniel weren't just listeners anymore. They were guardians, side by side, their proximity a quiet vow. Yet, as the rain tapped on, Evelyn wondered, would this fresh pact hold when the next shadow fell? The attic light watched, unwavering, but silence had a way of creeping back, stronger in the quiet hours.